what is your take, as somebody who has so much experience with NATO, about this alliance and whether or not it is frayed beyond repair?
I certainly hope it is not frayed beyond repair. I think it's the most important alliance in history. It has proven itself repeatedly, but it does have limits. And that particularly happens when it comes to what are so-called out-of-area operations, as was this one. And I very much see the president's perspective here, as does the Secretary General of NATO, Mark Rutte, who I knew very well as the Prime Minister of the Netherlands, a very skilled and diplomatic leader. And so I think he has expressed rightly the concerns. He agrees with the concerns that President Trump has voiced, but also does recognize that we need to keep this alliance together. It is hugely important. It is performing magnificently in supporting our Ukrainian partners who are fighting a common enemy in Russia.
General Petraeus, I just want to make sure I understand what you're saying correctly. Are you suggesting that President Trump is right in that NATO should have come in and helped militarily with the war in Iran?
No, I'm saying that individual NATO countries, I wish that they had been more supportive. An awful lot of them tried to sort of thread a needle here, saying we could use their base for defensive purposes only and so forth. In the end of the day, they actually did make available their bases, with the exception of Spain, and that's an issue that will have to be dealt with down the road. That does have to be addressed. But in this case, we are fighting an enemy who poses a threat not just to countries in the Gulf, but to countries in Europe as well. In fact, several NATO countries were threatened during this time, Turkey, the UK when it came to Cyprus and so forth. And again, I wish that they had been more forthcoming in their support without committing necessarily to the operations we were directly conducting against Iran. By the way, some of them have very important mine-sweeping capabilities, the UK in particular, and if we get into that down the road, it would be really helpful if they would commit to being part of whatever maritime coalition is necessary to ensure that the Strait of Hormuz is safe for transit of maritime vessels.
I want you to listen to what the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Kane, said this week about the military operation.
On February 28th, the President of the United States ordered the Joint Force to execute Operation Epic Fury with the direction to accomplish three distinct military objectives: destroy Iran's ballistic missile and drone capabilities, destroy the Iranian Navy, and destroy their defense industrial base to ensure that Iran cannot reconstitute the ability to project power outside their borders. Over the course of 38 days of major combat operation, the Joint Force achieved the military objectives as defined by the President.
And the President also said he wanted to take out Iran's enriched uranium. That didn't happen. Do you think this was a military success?
I think our military men and women performed magnificently in this regard, and I do believe very strongly that General Kane has been a sober and forthright voice in addressing the country, explaining what we have sought to do and what we have achieved. And I think that we have largely achieved the three objectives that he set out. Destruction implies something perhaps a bit more than what we have achieved relative to the missile launchers, stockpiles, and manufacturing facilities. But I think we're very close to that. And the same is true with their defense industrial base and so on. But I think there's a bit of a paradoxical question that now is being posed, and we can't answer it yet. We can only answer it when the ultimate resolution is achieved here. But that is whether Iran will emerge militarily very weakened. There's no question about the fact that all of their different capabilities have been degraded. I mean, their Navy is basically on the bottom of the Gulf at this point in time. There are other assets dramatically degraded or destroyed. But could they somehow, again, paradoxically, emerge from this militarily weakened, but perhaps actually strategically strengthened? And that revolves around what the ultimate resolution is of control of the Strait of Hormuz. And you can argue, though, they don't control it. Well, actually, in a way, just by disrupting traffic, they do, because the measure of merit for those who own these ships and own the cargoes in them is whether or not it's not about risk insurance. They can get that. It's about the lives of their crew members. And they have to have absolute confidence that these ships will not be struck in order to begin the process of clearing out this 700 vessels or so that are inside the Gulf, and even greater number outside the Gulf.
Which is why I'm guessing that in this really tenuous ceasefire that we're in right now, whatever is ultimately decided, which I guess is going to begin in talks set for starting on Saturday, must include a real deal in the Strait of Hormuz to determine whether or not the U.S. and Israel really did sufficiently weaken the regime in Iran.
Absolutely. And again, that is, I think, the central issue. These others, perhaps somewhat negotiable, not certainly the removal of U.S. forces or the right to resume enrichment. But again, some of these others, I think, can be worked. But control of the Red Sea, if that control of the Strait, if that becomes Iran's Panama Canal and they can issue tolls for that and so forth. I mean, if it's $2 million per vessel, which is reportedly what some companies have been paying to transit, and you multiply that times 100 or more ships a day, that is a very substantial amount of hard currency to enable Iran to repair the extraordinary damage that has been done, as General Kane rightly observed.
As you probably heard, the Vice President, J.D. Vance, the Special Envoy, Steve Witkoff, and the President's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, will all go to Islamabad, Pakistan, for talks with the Iranians on Saturday. You think they'll be able to salvage this ceasefire deal and end this war?
I think that they're going to make a very intense and focused effort to do so. But as you've pointed out, and other contributors over the last couple of hours, this whole ceasefire is incredibly tenuous. And it came into fruition in an atmosphere of ambiguity. And I have to emphasize, ambiguity is characteristic of any initial negotiations, especially for situations such as we have between Iran, the United States, and especially Israel. And there's certain dynamics going on that perhaps relate to diverging strategic interests of both the United States and Israel. And if we focus on Israel, which is now the pivot point for either maintaining this ceasefire or the termination of ceasefire, Israel has a specific set of objectives, and it has a limited time to accomplish these objectives. And that is, for at least a good amount of time, several years, a decade or so, if Israel is successful in decimating its enemies, both its proxy enemies, Hezbollah, and of course Iran, it has met and exceeded its objectives. But those objectives are not ours, are not necessarily all of ours. And of course, for our perspective, we had a list of objectives that the president announced. And whether we're there or not is another question. But these negotiations in Islamabad will be difficult. They will take time. But from a speculative point of view, I think both principal players, the U.S. And Iran, are interested in maintaining ceasefire, meaning no more shooting for the present period of time. There's no way any of us with any level of expertise or understanding of the Middle East out and say that this ceasefire will indeed hold and culminate in an actual treaty.
President Trump says the U.S. military will remain, in his words, in place until a full agreement is reached with Iran. Iran's Revolutionary Guard says they will stick to the ceasefire, but warn they have a, quote, finger on the trigger. Here's what the Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said just yesterday. Listen to this.
Iran would be wise to find a way to get the carrier pigeon to their troops out in remote locations to know not to shoot any longer one-way attacks or missiles, because it takes time sometimes for ceasefires to take hold. We're watching it. We're prepared if necessary.
Once a ceasefire agreement is reached, General, how long does it usually take, typically, for word to travel down to ground troops?
Yeah. it's dependent upon the organization of the respective armies. So if you're addressing the Iranian army, none of us have an intricate and deep understanding of the command and control systems with the Iranian government. But as the Secretary of War suggested, there are communication time lapses and order initiated at headquarters in Tehran, and the amount of time necessary to get to some field unit that is 400 or 500 kilometers away. That does take time, even with electronic tools. And I'll say that a similar situation can, under certain circumstances, result in our Army, meaning that specifics of the commander's objective, our commander being the president, working through the CENTCOM commander, that message takes a little bit of time. And to go back to that word that I have stressed even earlier, this whole period is ambiguous and challenging, and a lot of defining work has to be done in Islamabad to get clarity.
General Petraeus, you famously and rhetorically said to a journalist, "Tell me how this ends," about the Iraq war back in 2003. Do you think this ceasefire, tenuous as it seems to be, is likely to bring the Iran war to an end in the next 2 weeks?
Very uncertain, Anderson. In fact, I think the real question that is begged right now is whether, when it is finally ended, Iran clearly will be weaker militarily, but could they actually end up in a stronger position strategically? And the situation with the Strait of Hormuz suggests that that is possible. They can use that leverage not only to get America to seek this temporary ceasefire, which I suspect will be extended for a period of time. The negotiations can't conclude with the parties as far apart as they are. You know, compare the 15-point plan we put forward and the 10-point plan put forward by Iran, and there are numerous items on the Iranian plan that there's just no way we can accept. Removal of all U.S. forces, right to enrich, right to control the Strait of Hormuz, and apparently they're even going to charge in cryptocurrency to navigate the strait. I mean, they want to turn this into their Panama Canal. So there's a lot of very tough negotiating that's going to have to take place. But you do see the leverage that Iran is able to wield by this control of the Strait of Hormuz, and it could lead to President Trump insisting that Prime Minister Netanyahu cease operations in Lebanon. In fact, I think one reason why you saw such intense operations today was Israel taking advantage of whatever remaining time they have to degrade Hezbollah as far as they can, and they have done a great deal of that to ensure that they can't threaten Israel the way that they have in the past.
To your point, though, strategically, Iran has de facto control over the Strait of Hormuz right now, and if that continues months from now, years from now, that puts Iran in a much better position than they were previously. I mean, yes, there has been tremendous damage to facilities and weapons, but you know, they have partners they can get more missiles from down the road.
Well, it could conceivably give considerable leverage, although what the result from this is that the Gulf states are all going to find other ways to get their crude oil, natural gas, fertilizer, all of the other products that come out of the Gulf. They're going to figure out ways to avoid that control, limiting their ability to export these key items. But that's going to take a lot of investment, a lot of time, energy, and so forth. But it is a very different dynamic than what prior to the start of this operation, which without question, again, our military men and women have done magnificent work in dramatically degrading the capabilities of Iran militarily. But this does show, in some ways, this is a real deterrent for Iran against action that they don't want visited on them until at least the Gulf states have alternative routes to export what now goes through the Strait of Hormuz.
It is remarkable, though, that what started as there were different sort of propositions put forward about what the U.S. agenda was, but whether it was regime change or whether it was the nuclear program and the nuclear threat, that is now, seems like the primary interest for the U.S. right now is the Strait of Hormuz. And if Iran ends up both with no new treaty on the nuclear program and control of the Strait of Hormuz. And though the president says there's been regime change, technically, yes, there have been a change of individuals, but in terms of the rhetoric, the hard line of this Islamist regime, that continues.
This is why this is a tenuous ceasefire. Again, I'm pretty confident that the current ceasefire of 2 weeks will end up being extended because there won't be a full resolution of the issues given how far apart the parties are. But we'll have to see what happens in the weeks and even perhaps months down the road, whether some of the Iranian desires are so, again, unacceptable to the United States that we have to resume military action.
How fragile does that mean the ceasefire is?
It really depends on a simple premise. Do both sides want to go back to fighting, or do they want to not fight? Look, these points are ridiculous because they're not meant to be an agreement on a ceasefire. Those are the points for the negotiations which start this Saturday.
Yeah.
And that's the important point. All of this is prelude. And if both sides, all three sides, if you include Israel, want to negotiate on these key points where we're very, very far apart right now, they will hold to the ceasefire and let it work itself out at the negotiating table. But this notion that somehow everybody's going to be walking away from this and going back to a fight because they can't agree on what they're going to be negotiating on in a week, I think my view is that the ceasefire is fragile, but it will hold at least until they start the negotiations.
Who has the upper hand here?
The United States has thrown the most advanced military in the world against the Iranians for the last 25 days. The Iranians still think they're winning. They win because they're not losing. What else can we do to the Iranians to try to compel or persuade them to change their views on their nuclear program, their ballistic missile program, their proxies, and now the Strait of Hormuz? When you add that all up, you've got to say right now the Iranians have the upper hand.
The administration gives a target list regularly of what they've destroyed. Yep. But what I notice when I look at that is they never tell us relative to what's there. So there's a list of this many launchers have been. At one point, they did say they've only destroyed, I think, half of the actual missile launchers, right? So they did give us a base there. But in a lot of these things, it's sort of like, okay, that's a big number of destroyed drones. But maybe it's not big relative to how many they have or what their production capacity is, right? That hasn't been put out.
Yeah, I think we've been surprised at the resilience of the Iranian military. Mm-hmm. And I think our intelligence has let us down a little bit because we seem to keep getting the last launcher. But I've got to repeat, none of those attacks truly matter. That's the body count fallacy we had in Vietnam. The more we kill, the more we're going to be successful. This notion that somehow knocking out launchers, notching out air defense systems, knocking out drones is somehow going to military victory translating to strategic victory, I think that still is a flawed strategy.
Do you foresee a scenario in which the U.S. actually goes for the extreme option here and actually follows through and strikes energy infrastructure on Kharg Island? I mean, obviously that would be an economic destruction, obviously, for the Iranians, because that is where 90% of their oil exports come from. They export most of their oil, obviously, to China, but it would be a massive blow to the U.S. economy as well, just in terms of oil prices. I mean, it would be literally like the final scene of Reservoir Dogs. That would be how bad it would be. Just give us your thoughts on that, General.
Well, I think certainly the bombing of Kharg Island raises the issue that you could bomb other things on Kharg Island. And that's clearly the intent. But it also could be preparatory for, let's say, putting the Marines ashore. And there's always been talk about, let's seize Kharg Island. I'm not a big advocate of that, but if you want to put a raid in on Kharg Island and go in there and be in there on the ground and control it for a few hours or a few days and get out, as long as you're not trying to hold on to position and letting yourself become targets, maybe it makes sense. The other thing is, it's just also a part of going back and re-looking at targets that have been previously struck, because whenever you're in an air campaign like this, and we're in about 6 weeks or getting close to 6 weeks maybe, you start to run low on targets. It's just a fact. You can only generate so many targets that look valuable, and Kharg Island is very valuable, and maybe the Iranians have replaced some of the military gear that was struck the last time. So it could be routine, but I imagine there's a message to it, and that message is right now we're striking the military and saying, just as you suggest, it won't be very hard to come back and take out the rest of that infrastructure there.
And General, as we had noted in our previous conversation with Elena and Jim, Iran has responded by saying that if the United States does follow through on its threats, then it will darken all of the Middle East and the region there. Thus far, we have seen GCC countries quite resilient and reticent to join in on this fight. They have been defensive only in their response to incoming ballistic missiles and drones. If Iran follows through on those threats, do you foresee other Arab countries joining the United States and Israel?
I do see them joining in some limited and symbolic way. They obviously don't have the full capacity of the United States, but they do have modern equipment. They've got some pretty well-trained pilots. They've got ordnance, and they can participate in this. And maybe more than symbolically, yes. And I think that's a scenario that, honestly, none of us want to see happen. We don't want to see these countries hit. We don't want their desalination plants hit and their petroleum infrastructure hit. The whole world depends on the resources coming out of this fertilizer, helium, as well as crude oil and refined products. And so it just digs us deeper into a hole economically for the whole world. So I hope it won't happen. But nevertheless, Iran has to recognize that it's intolerable for them to claim that they will keep permanent control of the Strait of Hormuz. Our friends in the Gulf will never accept that. They don't want it. They don't want to be under the Iranian thumb, and they don't trust Iran's larger motivations in the region. So that's not a possible end state that's stable.
General, there have been several times in the past where a lot of people, and I would put myself in this category, have witnessed Trump make certain threats and sort of dismissed it as, oh, you know what, he's never going to actually go ahead and do that, including threatening to capture Nicolas Maduro or threatening to kill the Ayatollah of Iran. A lot of people saw those threats as bluster until they woke up several weeks later, checked their phone, and saw him actually do it. And so when Donald Trump threatens to obliterate power plants in Iran, which would be, of course, devastating to the Iranian civilians, it would leave them in darkness and without electricity, do you actually foresee the president following through on those threats?
I think there'll be an examination of the power plants and the other infrastructure that is dual use. And so the question will be, is that power plant providing electricity to universities that are doing military research? Is it providing electricity to factories that are producing military products, or chemical plants that are producing gunpowder and other things for the military? If there's a connection to the military, if it's dual use, it's a legitimate target. And even if it creates civilian hardship, it's still a legitimate target. You know, before the United States invaded and the Allies crossed the English Channel in 1944, we spent about 2 months going after infrastructure in northern France. We went after bridges and railroads and marshalling yards and everything that could have possibly helped German forces maneuver against us. And a lot of civilian casualties were incurred. And these were among our French friends. And it's just what happens in warfare. So there are going to be some dual use targets that are totally legitimate and that no doubt will be struck.
Word of this new round of attacks on Kharg Island, which is right there. We can zoom in, and we're being told by various officials that the targets were the military sites here, not the oil facilities there. But what would be the point of this new round of attacks on Kharg, General?
Well, I could think of two reasons. Number one, it would be a preparatory attack softening it up, so to speak, if there was some sort of land invasion to try to secure the infrastructure without destroying it. I wonder if they've actually knocked out any of the electrical transmission lines throughout that are connected to the oil infrastructure. As you know, the oil has to be pumped into tankers. If they can take out the transmission lines, they can actually stop those pumps without significantly affecting the infrastructure and the ability to restart it sometime in the future quickly.
It was really a remarkable execution of a very high-risk operation. And I think a couple of key things that I've gleaned from this over the last day or two is that, first off, all the training that both these airmen had, their SEER training leading up to this shoot down, it worked, right? So they were both able to move to an area, one a little bit shorter duration than the other, to an area that was out of natural lines of drift, properly signal the rescue force, and then execute a rescue. Certainly on the second recovery, not to downplay the great work of the first airman, but to get the colonel weapons systems officer out, a lot of just phenomenal interagency coordination, CIA, all of our intelligence agencies, and then certainly the Joint Special Operations Command working directly with Admiral Cooper and his staff to get this big orchestra in place to enable, a ground force to come in, tactical aviation to come in to be able to facilitate his rescue. So very, very impressive.
And let's just kind of drill down on just what this airman did. First of all, he was injured, apparently, when he ejected from his F-15. Then he scrambled up a 7,000-foot ridge line, hid in a crevice to avoid detection. You mentioned the training. I would imagine that, of course, a lot of it is training, but a lot of it is instinct as well.
Oh, certainly. It's a combination of the both, Dana. And, there's no higher motivation, I'm sure, for this airman, this colonel, than, here he is, well behind enemy lines, injured. And, it was reliant on his intestinal fortitude and, his perseverance to be able to get to a location where he could safely signal back to his headquarters or other, overflight aircraft, etc., to let him know that, hey, I'm alive, I'm in a secure location, and now I'm going to wait for rescue to occur.
Your reaction to this news from President Trump that the service member has been rescued?
As a service member and a U.S. citizen, I am totally elated. This is a wonderful outcome in what could have been disastrous for the U.S. in terms of the global perspective of this conflict with Iran.
I'm curious if you just really punctuate that last point, General, just how high the stakes were, not only obviously with the life of the service member hanging in the balance, but also what this could have potentially meant diplomatically and militarily for this conflict that rages on.
If that crew member of that F-15 Strike Eagle had in fact been captured by the Iranians, there is no doubt in my mind that the Iranians would exploit that capture. That service member would see himself paraded in front of social media outlets in Iran, television, and the caption on that is, "America is weak. Its claim of indefensibility has now been stricken, and we Iranians will prevail in this conflict." And then, of course, what was discussed by several of your other commentators is the exploitation of that service member in custody, the efforts, and I would certainly assert very violent efforts to extract valuable information from that very proud and heroic member of our Air Force.
Yeah, thankfully, that was not the case. When you just in reading over this post from the president, General, it really does paint a harrowing picture of what the last day and a half had been like for the service member. As the president writes that he was behind enemy lines in treacherous mountains of Iran, being hunted down by our enemies, wrote the president. But also that the president suggesting here that the military was essentially monitoring him 24 hours a day and planning this rescue. So based on this post from the president, it seems that it's likely that the Pentagon knew exactly where he was, perhaps just waiting for that most ideal moment to mitigate risks, given the small arms fire that they experienced recently, to be able to extract him.
Yeah, I appreciate that, your explanation of the dynamics of a search and rescue recovery mission. To get down to the basics, at the moment that crew member ejected from the F-15, an emergency beacon is activated, and that communicates with a satellite system. The signal is sent to command headquarters, and that initiates the search and rescue operation. The question I had personally, especially since almost 48 hours transpired since the ejection, is whether or not that system was either degraded or somehow the signal was lost. But based upon what we see now, the signal must have continuously was continuously emitting information about the location of this crew member, all of this encrypted under some very, very dangerous and difficult circumstances. And you even addressed, and it came up a couple of times, about the geography of this particular location. On that west side of Iran, it is mountainous, certainly not near any urban center at all. For anyone that is in a situation such as this crew member, he's ejected, he's injured, he has very light kit, meaning he has some very few rations, a little bit of water, and here he is in the midst of nowhere trying to evade a multiplicity of Iranians who have been motivated by this offer, both an inspirational offer from the Islamic Republic leadership, whomever that is at this particular point in time, plus the alleged incentive of $60,000 US. So putting all this together, it was extremely dangerous. And once again, we salute the members of our armed services who conducted this rescue mission and were able to extract this service member. The situation otherwise would make tomorrow a very, very difficult day, not only for that crew member if he were apprehended, but more importantly for the whole effort that has been expended thus far in this conflict.